A single act of spite can tow away a car, but it can also tow away a career. The crowd outside the Jefferson County Courthouse stood frozen beneath the warm Alabama sun as television cameras captured a moment no veteran officer ever expected to experience. Officer Ethan Brooks stared silently at the polished wooden box resting on the table before him. Inside lay his badge, neatly placed beside his department identification, waiting to be surrendered forever. Around him, attorneys exchanged quiet words while reporters scribbled notes with growing urgency. The city had gathered to witness the conclusion of a case that had dominated headlines for weeks, but few people understood that the story had never been about a vehicle. It had never been about a parking dispute. It had never been about a misunderstanding. It was about pride, assumptions, and one decision that transformed an ordinary workday into the most expensive mistake of one officer's life. Ethan swallowed hard as the commissioner looked directly at him. There was no anger in the room, only disappointment. Sometimes disappointment carries more weight than outrage because it leaves no room for excuses. Across the courtroom, District Attorney Naomi Carter remained composed, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She simply watched the process unfold with the calm confidence of someone who had trusted the law from the very beginning. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument ever could. Camera shutters echoed across the room, while legal clerks organized stacks of documents that would soon become part of the public record. Every page represented another piece of evidence, another witness statement, another fact that could not be ignored. Ethan lowered his eyes for only a second before hearing the commissioner speak the words he had hoped would never come. "Your service with this department ends today." The sentence landed quietly, yet its impact spread through the room like a wave. Reporters rushed toward the hallway, already preparing the breaking news alerts that would soon appear across every local station in Birmingham. Outside, microphones waited beneath bright afternoon skies, eager to explain how a veteran officer had lost everything without ever stepping into a criminal courtroom. Imagine standing there, watching years of hard work disappear because of one moment you believed no one would question. Imagine realizing that the smallest decision can become the first domino in a chain that refuses to stop falling. Ethan understood that feeling now, but understanding had arrived far too late. Naomi slowly gathered her briefcase, nodded politely to the judge, and walked toward the exit without saying a single word to the man who had once believed he held complete authority over her day. She didn't need the final word because the truth had already spoken for her. For weeks earlier, on an ordinary Monday morning, neither of them could have imagined that one tow truck, one parking lot, and one impulsive decision would change both of their lives forever. 4 weeks earlier, Monday arrived with the quiet rhythm that usually settled over downtown Birmingham before the morning rush. The courthouse plaza slowly filled with attorneys carrying leather briefcases, courthouse employees balancing coffee cups, and citizens preparing for another day inside one of the busiest public buildings in the county. The air was already warm, promising another afternoon that would climb well into the 80s, while long shadows stretched across the parking lot as the sun rose above the city skyline. Naomi Carter guided her dark blue sedan into a public parking space located just across the street from the courthouse entrance. She glanced at the dashboard clock, collected a slim folder filled with legal briefs, and paused for a brief moment before stepping outside. Her schedule was packed with meetings, court appearances, and policy discussions that would likely keep her inside the courthouse until evening, but there was nothing unusual about the day ahead. For nearly 15 years, she had built a reputation as someone who prepared carefully, treated everyone with respect, and believed that the law worked best when people refused to let emotions outweigh facts. She greeted the parking attendant with a friendly smile, confirmed that the space was authorized for courthouse personnel during business hours, and placed the printed parking permit neatly on the dashboard where it could be seen through the windshield. Satisfied that everything was in order, she locked the vehicle and walked toward the courthouse steps with the calm confidence that came from years of routine. On the opposite side of the street, Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against his patrol vehicle while finishing the last sip of his coffee. After nearly 2 decades wearing a uniform, he believed he could recognize people who belonged and people who did not with little more than a passing glance. Experience had slowly transformed confidence into certainty, and certainty had quietly become something far less reliable. As his eyes followed Naomi across the sidewalk, he frowned. Without reading the permit displayed inside the windshield or checking the parking authorization list available through dispatch, he convinced himself that the vehicle should not have been parked there. Instead of asking questions, he reached a conclusion. Instead of verifying the facts, he trusted his assumptions. Imagine walking into work completely unaware that someone had already decided who you were before hearing a single word from you. Naomi disappeared through the courthouse security entrance, exchanging polite greetings with deputies and clerks who knew her well, while Ethan continued watching the unattended sedan from across the street. Minutes passed, and the thought refused to leave his mind. What had begun as idle curiosity slowly transformed into personal irritation. In his mind, removing the vehicle would teach someone a lesson about following rules, even though he had not taken the simplest step of confirming whether any rule had actually been broken. He reached for the radio attached to his shoulder, requested a tow service, and looked once more toward the courthouse doors. Around him, pedestrians continued their morning routines without noticing that a completely avoidable decision had just been set into motion, one that would eventually draw lawyers, journalists, city officials, and an entire community into a story that none of them expected to witness. The tow truck arrived less than 15 minutes later, its bright amber lights reflecting across the courthouse windows as the driver slowed beside Naomi Carter's sedan. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, and glanced toward Officer Ethan Brooks before asking the question every experienced operator asked first. "Are you certain this vehicle is authorized for removal?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Absolutely. Go ahead." The driver nodded, trusting the officer's authority, and began preparing the equipment. Nearby pedestrians slowed their pace, curious about the activity unfolding in what was normally a quiet government parking area. Inside the courthouse, Naomi was reviewing case files with two assistant attorneys when one of the clerks entered the conference room, carrying a concerned expression. "Miss Carter, someone just told me a tow truck is hooking up a dark blue sedan with a courthouse permit. Is that your car?" Naomi looked up, surprised more than alarmed. "It should not be. My permit is displayed exactly where it always is." She thanked the clerk, excused herself politely, and walked toward the front entrance with steady steps. She did not rush. She did not assume the worst. Years of working inside the justice system had taught her that many problems could be solved with a calm conversation. As the courthouse doors opened, she immediately spotted her vehicle already lifted onto the tow truck's wheel assembly. Officer Brooks stood nearby with his arms folded, watching the process as though everything were perfectly routine. Naomi approached respectfully. "Good morning, officer. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. That is my vehicle, and it has a valid courthouse parking permit displayed on the dashboard." Ethan barely glanced toward the windshield. "The truck is already connected. You should have thought about that before parking here." Naomi remained composed. "The permit is visible through the front glass. If you would simply take a moment to verify it, I believe this can be resolved." Ethan shook his head before she finished speaking. "The decision has already been made." Several people standing near the courthouse entrance quietly watched the exchange. Some recognized Naomi immediately, but hesitated to interrupt. Others simply sensed that something about the situation felt unnecessarily tense. Imagine standing only a few feet away, knowing that the answer could be found with a single glance through a windshield, yet watching someone refuse to look. The tow truck driver shifted uneasily. "Officer, I can stop for a second if you want to verify the permit." Ethan answered firmly. "Continue the tow." Naomi slowly reached into her briefcase and removed her courthouse identification. "I am the elected district attorney for this county. I am not asking for special treatment. I am simply asking that the permit be examined before my vehicle is removed." Ethan looked briefly at the identification before replying with a dismissive tone. "Everyone claims to have an important job when their car is getting towed." The driver hesitated again, but official instructions carried weight, and he continued preparing the truck. Around them, several bystanders quietly lifted their phones, not to create a spectacle, but because they sensed they were witnessing something that should be documented. Naomi noticed the cameras, then calmly slipped her identification back into her briefcase. She took one slow breath, memorized Ethan's badge number, noted the tow truck company displayed on the driver's door, and quietly observed the nearby security cameras mounted above the courthouse entrance. She did not argue again. Instead, she watched every detail with careful attention, already understanding that facts preserved in the present often become the strongest voice in the future. The tow truck slowly pulled away from the curb, carrying Naomi Carter's sedan through the heart of downtown, while dozens of silent witnesses watched it disappear around the corner. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Even the people who knew nothing about her could sense that something about the encounter had felt unnecessarily cold. Naomi remained standing on the courthouse steps for another few seconds, her eyes following the truck until it vanished from sight. Then she looked back toward Officer Ethan Brooks. His expression suggested complete confidence. To him, the matter was finished. Another vehicle had been removed. Another morning would continue as planned. He adjusted the radio on his shoulder, nodded briefly to another patrol officer arriving nearby, and walked toward his cruiser without looking back. Naomi quietly opened the notes application on her phone. She recorded the exact time. She entered the patrol car number. She saved the badge number she had memorized only moments earlier. She wrote down the name of the towing company, the license number printed on the truck, and the names of 2 courthouse employees who had witnessed the conversation from beginning to end. Every detail mattered. Every fact deserved to be preserved exactly as it happened. Imagine standing in a moment where anger would feel completely justified, yet choosing discipline instead because you know emotions fade while evidence remains. That choice often separates temporary satisfaction from lasting accountability. One of the assistant attorneys hurried outside after hearing what had happened. "Naomi, are you all right? We can call someone immediately." She smiled gently. "I appreciate that. First, let us preserve the facts exactly as they are." Her voice remained calm, almost surprisingly calm, considering what had just occurred. She asked the courthouse receptionist whether the exterior security cameras continuously recorded the entrance. She confirmed that they did. She politely requested that the footage be preserved according to standard retention procedures. Next, she thanked the tow truck driver for remaining professional throughout the interaction, making it clear that she held no frustration towards someone who had simply followed official instructions. The driver looked relieved by her kindness. "I honestly thought the permit would be checked," he admitted quietly. Naomi nodded. "Thank you for telling me that." Meanwhile, Officer Brooks climbed into his patrol vehicle feeling unusually satisfied. In his mind, he had reinforced authority. He believed he had prevented someone from taking advantage of the rules. He never questioned whether his first impression had been accurate, because confidence often disguises itself as certainty. As he drove away, he did not realize that several people had already emailed courthouse security requesting copies of surveillance footage before it could be overwritten. Others had quietly written down the exact sequence of events while the memory remained fresh. Facts were beginning to organize themselves long before anyone mentioned legal action. Naomi returned inside the courthouse, arriving a few minutes late for the meeting she had left unexpectedly. Her colleagues expected frustration, perhaps even outrage, but instead she placed her notebook on the conference table and calmly said, "Let us finish today's work first." The law is most effective when it is allowed to follow its proper course. The room fell silent. Everyone understood that she was not ignoring what had happened. She was simply refusing to let one person's decision control the rest of her day. Outside, the courthouse resumed its normal rhythm as people hurried to hearings and appointments, unaware that the quiet notes Naomi had written during those few minutes would soon become the foundation of a case built not on emotion, speculation, or revenge, but on verified facts that no one would be able to explain away. By late afternoon, Naomi Carter finally had a moment to retrieve her vehicle from the impound lot. The process was slow, methodical, and filled with paperwork that should never have existed in the first place. Every form she signed became another document with a date, a time, and an official record attached to it. She carefully requested copies of every receipt, every authorization, and every inspection report connected to the tow. The employees at the lot remained courteous, explaining that they had simply received a standard request from law enforcement. Naomi thanked each of them for their professionalism. She understood the difference between people carrying out assigned duties and the individual who had made the original decision. As she drove home that evening, she resisted the temptation to replay the conversation with Officer Ethan Brooks in her mind. Instead, she thought about procedure. Procedure protected everyone when followed correctly. If procedure had been ignored, then the evidence would reveal it. The following morning, before the courthouse became busy, Naomi met quietly with a small legal team she trusted. She did not enter the room looking for revenge. She entered looking for answers. A whiteboard soon filled with simple questions. Was the parking permit valid? Yes. Was it clearly displayed? According to multiple witnesses, yes. Was the officer required to verify the permit before ordering a tow? That was a question the department's own policies would answer. Could surveillance footage confirm the sequence of events? Most likely. One by one, assumptions gave way to facts. Imagine discovering that the strongest case is often built not by dramatic moments, but by ordinary details that everyone else overlooks. A timestamp, a policy manual, a security camera, a written report. Together, they tell a story that memories alone never can. Naomi instructed her staff to submit formal records requests through the proper legal channels. She wanted the dispatch audio, the body camera recording, the parking enforcement policies, and any communication related to the tow request. Every request was written professionally and without unnecessary language. Meanwhile, news of the incident quietly spread through the courthouse. Clerks discussed it over coffee. Bailiffs compared what they had witnessed. Several attorneys admitted they had been surprised that the permit had never been examined despite being visible through the windshield. None of them exaggerated the story. They simply described what they had seen. Across town, Officer Brooks reported for duty, believing the matter had already faded into yesterday's routine. He joked casually with another officer, completed his morning equipment check, and responded to regular service calls. When his supervisor briefly mentioned that someone had requested documentation related to the previous day's tow, Ethan shrugged without concern. Everything was handled correctly. He replied with complete confidence. What he did not know was that the first pieces of information had already begun arriving. The courthouse security office confirmed that exterior cameras had captured the entire interaction from multiple angles. Dispatch logs documented the exact minute the tow request was made. Parking authorization records confirmed that Naomi's permit had been valid before the truck ever arrived. None of these facts accused anyone by themselves. They simply existed, quiet and unchanged, waiting to be assembled like pieces of a puzzle. As the week continued, Naomi never discussed the incident publicly. She continued prosecuting cases, attending meetings, and serving the community exactly as she always had. Her calmness puzzled many people who expected anger. They did not realize that she had already placed her confidence somewhere much stronger than emotion. She had placed it in documented truth, knowing that when every verified fact finally stood together, the story would speak more clearly than any argument ever could. By the beginning of the second week, the requests Naomi Carter had quietly submitted were no longer just pieces of paperwork moving through government offices. They had become a trail that connected people, records, and decisions in ways no one had anticipated. One envelope after another arrived at her office exactly as required by public records law. Each document was carefully reviewed, dated, and compared against the others. There were no dramatic discoveries at first, only small inconsistencies that slowly formed a larger picture. The dispatch recording confirmed the exact minute Officer Ethan Brooks requested the tow truck. The timestamp matched the security cameras. The security cameras matched the courthouse access logs. The courthouse access logs confirmed that Naomi had entered the building only minutes before the request was made. Every independent record supported the next without contradiction. Imagine discovering that the truth does not usually arrive all at once. It arrives quietly, one verified fact at a time, until the entire story becomes impossible to ignore. The body camera footage became the most revealing piece of evidence, not because it contained dramatic moments, but because it captured what never happened. At no point did Ethan walk to the windshield to inspect the displayed parking permit. At no point did he contact courthouse administration to verify employee authorization. At no point did he request dispatch to confirm whether the permit number was registered. Instead, the recording showed a decision being made before the available information had ever been examined. Naomi watched the footage only once before placing it back into the case file. She did not need to replay it. The facts were already clear. Meanwhile, another attorney working with her noticed something unexpected while reviewing publicly available complaint records. Ethan's name appeared more than once in previous citizen complaints involving vehicle enforcement. None of those complaints had resulted in formal discipline, and none alone proved wrongdoing. Even so, they established a pattern that justified asking additional questions. Were proper procedures consistently followed? Were verification steps being skipped in similar situations? Those questions deserved objective answers. Additional records were requested through the proper legal process. Inside the police department, supervisors gradually realized that the matter had grown beyond a routine towing dispute. Internal Affairs requested copies of the incident report along with the supporting documentation. Command staff began reviewing departmental towing policies line by line. What initially seemed like an ordinary administrative inquiry slowly evolved into a comprehensive procedural review. Officer Brooks noticed the increased attention but remained convinced everything would end in his favor. He reassured colleagues that the department would support his judgment because he believed he had acted with authority. Confidence still guided every conversation he had, even as more documents continued arriving from different offices across the city. Back at the courthouse, Naomi maintained the same steady routine she had always followed. She prosecuted cases, attended community meetings, and greeted courthouse employees with the same professionalism they had always known. She never discussed the growing investigation in hallways or elevators. She allowed the official process to unfold without public commentary. Yet beneath that quiet routine, the evidence file continued expanding. Security footage, dispatch communications, written policies, witness statements, parking authorization records, and official reports now rested together inside a single organized binder. Each page reinforced the next until speculation disappeared completely. What remained was something far more powerful than opinion. It was a documented sequence of events that neither memory nor personal belief could change. And as attorneys on both sides began examining the same collection of verified facts, everyone involved slowly realized that this story was no longer about where one car had been parked. It had become a question of whether authority had been exercised responsibly, and that question was about to reach a courtroom where evidence, not assumptions, would determine the outcome. 3 weeks after the incident, the conference room reserved for sworn testimony felt unusually quiet. There were no television cameras inside, no raised voices, and no dramatic confrontations. Only attorneys, court reporters, department representatives, and neatly organized binders filled with documents that had been gathered over days of careful preparation. Every person understood that the facts presented there could shape decisions reaching far beyond a single parking dispute. Officer Ethan Brooks entered wearing a neatly pressed suit instead of his patrol uniform. He greeted several colleagues with polite confidence, still convinced the evidence would ultimately support the choices he had made that Monday morning. Across the table, Naomi Carter calmly arranged her notes beside a stack of exhibits. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone. She wanted only one thing: a complete and accurate account of what had happened. Imagine walking into a room believing your memory will protect you, only to discover that every important moment has already been preserved by cameras, timestamps, written policies, and official records. Confidence can disappear quickly when facts begin speaking one after another. The questioning began with routine background information before moving carefully through the events of that morning. Ethan explained that he believed the vehicle was parked improperly. He stated that he had acted according to his understanding of department procedures. His answers remained steady until the first exhibit appeared on the screen. It was a clear image captured by the courthouse security camera only seconds before the tow truck arrived. The enlarged photograph showed the parking permit resting plainly on the dashboard exactly where courthouse policy required it to be displayed. One attorney asked a simple question: "Did you examine the permit before requesting the tow?" Ethan paused briefly before replying that he did not specifically remember. The next exhibit followed immediately. Body camera footage played without interruption. Everyone watched as Naomi respectfully asked him to verify the permit. They watched the tow truck driver also suggest taking a moment to check the windshield. They watched Ethan decline both opportunities. No commentary accompanied the recording because none was necessary. The footage spoke with remarkable clarity. The attorney then placed the department towing policy beside the video transcript. One paragraph required officers to verify visible authorization before ordering removal whenever practical. Another required reasonable efforts to resolve obvious questions before involving outside contractors. Ethan quietly read the policy for several moments before admitting he had not followed those verification steps that day. The room remained silent except for the sound of pages turning. One by one, additional exhibits confirmed the timeline. Dispatch logs matched the body camera clock. Security footage matched the written tow authorization. Witness statements from courthouse employees independently described the same sequence of events without significant differences. None of the evidence relied upon assumptions. Every piece reinforced another verified source. Naomi never interrupted. She never displayed satisfaction. She simply listened as the record gradually assembled itself into a complete narrative. By the end of the session, the discussion had shifted away from a single vehicle entirely. The focus had become professional judgment, procedural responsibility, and whether authority had been exercised with the care expected of a public servant. As everyone quietly packed away their files, Ethan looked toward the neatly stacked exhibits covering the conference table. For the first time since that Monday morning, certainty began giving way to realization. The investigation was no longer asking what he believed had happened. It was asking what the evidence could prove, and the answer was becoming clearer with every verified document placed into the official record. The official findings were released just before sunrise on a quiet Friday, and by the time the courthouse doors opened, copies had already reached the mayor's office, the police department, and every attorney directly connected to the case. The conclusion was careful, detailed, and supported by weeks of documented evidence. It did not accuse with emotion. It explained with facts. The report concluded that established verification procedures had not been followed before the tow was authorized, that multiple opportunities to confirm the validity of the parking permit had been declined, and that the resulting actions exposed the city to significant legal liability. Those words carried consequences that no one could simply dismiss. Within hours, settlement discussions accelerated. City attorneys understood that a lengthy trial would only place additional evidence into public view while increasing costs for taxpayers. After reviewing every document, every recording, and every witness statement, both sides reached an agreement that included substantial financial compensation, reimbursement of all related expenses, and formal commitments to strengthen training and oversight regarding parking enforcement procedures. The amount attracted headlines across Alabama, but the money itself was never the center of the story. The greater cost had been measured in public trust. Imagine spending years building a professional reputation only to watch it unravel because of a decision that could have been avoided with a single careful look through a windshield. Sometimes the smallest moment carries the largest consequences. Later, that afternoon, Officer Ethan Brooks received official notice requiring him to appear before the department's command staff. The meeting lasted less than an hour. Department leaders acknowledged his years of service, but they also emphasized that public confidence depended upon accountability when established procedures were ignored. At the conclusion of the meeting, Ethan was informed that his employment with the department would end effective immediately. He listened quietly, signed the necessary documents, and removed the badge that had rested on his uniform for nearly 2 decades. No one raised their voice. No one celebrated. The room remained solemn because every person present understood that careers rarely end because of one isolated event. They end when choices and accountability finally meet. Outside the building, reporters gathered behind designated press lines, waiting for official statements. Ethan walked past them without speaking, carrying a small box containing personal belongings collected from his locker. He kept his eyes forward, avoiding the cameras that now followed every step. Across town, Naomi Carter continued her regular schedule inside the courthouse. She argued motions, reviewed case files, and met with victims seeking justice in completely unrelated matters. When colleagues quietly congratulated her, she thanked them politely but reminded each of them that the outcome belonged to the legal process, not to any individual victory. She instructed her office to continue cooperating fully with the city's implementation of improved training standards so similar mistakes would become less likely in the future. Her focus remained exactly where it had been from the beginning. Not punishment for its own sake, but stronger institutions built upon fairness, professionalism, and respect. As evening settled over Birmingham, newspaper headlines summarized the settlement in bold print, Yet those few words could never fully capture what had truly happened. One ordinary morning had begun with assumptions. It ended weeks later with documented truth, institutional accountability, and lasting changes that reached far beyond one parking space. The evidence had never shouted. It had simply remained consistent until every fact stood together, and when that moment finally arrived, the outcome became impossible to ignore. The following Monday, life around the Jefferson County Courthouse looked almost exactly the same as it had before the incident. Attorneys hurried across the sidewalks carrying briefcases. Judges entered through familiar doors. Citizens waited patiently for hearings that would shape important moments in their lives. At first glance, nothing seemed different. Yet for those who had witnessed the events unfold over the previous month, the atmosphere carried a quiet reminder that trust in public institutions is strengthened not when mistakes never happen, but when those mistakes are acknowledged and corrected with honesty. New training sessions had already begun inside the police department. Supervisors reviewed updated verification procedures with officers assigned to parking enforcement, emphasizing that every decision, no matter how routine it appeared, deserved careful attention and objective review. Several young officers listened closely as experienced instructors repeated a lesson that had become impossible to ignore. Authority should never replace observation. Assumptions should never replace verification. A few extra seconds spent confirming the facts could prevent years of consequences. Imagine being the next officer standing beside a vehicle with an important decision to make. Would you rely on a first impression, or would you take one careful look before acting? Sometimes the future is shaped by choices so small they barely seem important in the moment. Naomi Carter continued serving the community with the same quiet professionalism that had defined her career long before anyone outside the courthouse recognized her name. She declined multiple interview requests, explaining that the legal record already spoke clearly enough. Instead of discussing herself, she encouraged conversations about fairness, accountability, and equal treatment under the law. To her, lasting change mattered far more than temporary attention. One afternoon, as she walked down the courthouse hallway, a young law student approached with visible hesitation. The student thanked Naomi for remaining calm throughout the entire process and asked how she had resisted responding with anger when she had every reason to feel frustrated. Naomi paused for only a moment before answering with a gentle smile. Anger can win an argument for a minute. Evidence can protect justice for a lifetime. The student quietly wrote those words into a notebook before thanking her once again. Across town, Ethan Brooks began adjusting to a life that looked very different from the one he had expected only weeks earlier. The uniform was gone. The daily routine had changed. Time provided opportunities for reflection that constant activity had once hidden. Whether he fully understood every consequence of his decisions remained known only to him, but the official record would remain unchanged. It had been built carefully, honestly, and without exaggeration. As another sunset settled over Birmingham, the courthouse lights gradually dimmed while the final employees locked their office doors and headed home. The parking spaces outside stood quietly beneath the evening sky, appearing no different from any other day. Yet one ordinary parking space had become a lasting reminder that dignity cannot be measured by titles, uniforms, or assumptions. It is measured by how people choose to treat one another when no one expects their actions to be questioned. In the end, one vehicle was removed, one career came to an unexpected close, and one community received an enduring lesson that reached far beyond a single morning. Because power may control a moment, but truth has a way of shaping history, and when truth is patiently protected by facts, justice does not need to raise its voice to be heard.